Welcome to Afra Global 24, your trusted source for breaking news, deep insights, and stories shaping Africa and the world. Stay informed, stay connected, and experience the news that matters. Right here, 24/7. Africa, a continent of resilience, rich in minerals, culture, and hope, is once again shaking the foundations of global geopolitics. But this time, not through elections, not through diplomacy, not through quiet negotiations in marble halls. This time, it's through coups. Across the heart of Africa, from the Atlantic shores of Guinea to the desert frontiers of Sudan, a new line is being drawn. Analysts call it the Coup belt, a stretch of nations where uniforms have replaced suits and military decrees echo louder than parliamentary debates. In just 4 years, 8 African nations have experienced military takeovers, a rhythm of rebellion spreading like wildfire through regions once hailed as the future of democratic governance. But what's fueling this wave? Is it foreign interference? Is it frustration with failed civilian governments? Or is it Africa's youth, rising, demanding something real, something authentic, something theirs? From Bamako to Ouagadougou, from Niamey to Libreville, soldiers have stepped forward claiming to save their nations from corruption, from external control, and from leaders who overstayed their welcome. Yet, behind the sound of gunfire and the clatter of boots, a deeper story emerges, one of betrayal, hope, and sovereignty. Mali, 2020. It began quietly. In Mali, a nation worn down by jihadist attacks and economic instability, soldiers seized power, accusing the government of incompetence. At first, the world called it a temporary military transition. But what followed was the start of a domino effect. Burkina Faso soon followed, led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a young soldier who became the face of Africa's new generation, bold, nationalist, and unapologetically Pan-African. Traoré's message resonated far beyond his borders. Africa must be free, politically, economically, and mentally. Those words weren't just rhetoric. They became a battle cry. Niger, Guinea, and Gabon soon joined the ranks of nations where the military said, "Enough is enough." Each coup followed a familiar pattern: accusations of corruption, claims of foreign manipulation, promises to restore sovereignty, and crowds of young people cheering in the streets. To the outside world, these were illegal seizures of power. But to many Africans, especially the youth, they symbolized liberation. Youth on the streets. Across the continent, millions of young Africans, tired of recycled promises, rigged elections, and leaders who treat states like personal estates, began to see military rule not as regression, but as rebellion. In the age of social media, hashtags replaced leaflets. Videos of Traoré and Mali's Assimi Goïta circulated like wildfire. "We want leaders who defend our gold, not those who sell it. We are not colonies anymore." A generational revolution was being born, not through parliaments, but through pride. The Coup belt, that's what analysts call it. But on African streets, it's being called something else. The sovereignty line, a line where nations are rejecting Western military bases, IMF conditions, and French dominance in favor of self-determination. It's not just about power, it's about ownership. The West panicked. Sanctions were imposed. Aid was frozen. French troops were ordered out. But something unexpected happened. The sanctions didn't break these nations. They adapted. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger formed a new alliance, the Alliance of Sahel states, pledging to defend one another against foreign interference. They began trading resources directly, seeking new partners like Russia, Turkey, and China. For the first time in modern history, the Sahel wasn't begging for help. It was demanding respect. And that's when the world realized this wasn't just about soldiers. It was about sovereignty. But let's not romanticize everything. Each coup brings instability, fear, and the risk of violence. Not every promise is fulfilled. Not every general becomes a hero. Some coups mask power struggles. Others are driven by desperation. And civilians, ordinary Africans, often bear the cost. The question remains, will this coup belt create a new dawn or another dark chapter? History tells us that Africa's revolutions are never simple. The independence struggles of the 1960s promised freedom, but left chains of economic dependency. Now, 60 years later, a new generation is rewriting that story, in khaki, not suits. To them, democracy without dignity means nothing. Freedom without ownership means nothing. And elections that only favor the elite mean nothing at all. So, as the world condemns these coups, Africa is asking a harder question. Who benefits from the chaos we were living in before? Because maybe what we're witnessing isn't just a breakdown of democracy, but the birth of a new kind of African governance. Footage of military parades in Ouagadougou, youth waving flags in Bamako, a map glowing from Guinea to Sudan. A new Africa rising, proud, defiant, uncertain, but unbroken. The coup belt is expanding. But perhaps it's not just about coups. Perhaps it's about Africa finally standing tall, no longer waiting for permission to change. Because in every revolution, there's a moment when the world stops listening, and Africa begins to speak for itself. Across Africa's heartland, a new political reality is taking shape, a seismic transformation that analysts are calling the coup belt. From the Atlantic coast of Guinea to the deserts of Sudan, the military has become a dominant force, reshaping governments and redrawing the map of power in the continent. In just 4 years, 8 African nations, Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Gabon, Sudan, and most recently Madagascar, have seen their governments fall to military coups. What was once condemned as a relic of Africa's post-independence instability is now becoming a defining feature of its 21st century politics. To some, this wave of coups signals a dangerous retreat from democracy. To others, it represents a correction, a revolt against corruption, foreign interference, and political systems that have failed to serve their people. The truth lies somewhere in between, in the tension between hope and history, sovereignty and struggle. For decades, Africa was urged to embrace Western-style democracy, multi-party elections, free markets, and foreign partnerships. But as those systems matured, disillusionment grew. Elections often brought recycled elites. Parliaments became arenas for personal gain, and promises of development faded under the weight of debt and dependency. By the early 2020s, many Africans, especially the youth, began asking hard questions. Why do our nations, rich in gold, oil, and cobalt, still struggle to feed their people? Why are our leaders accountable to donors and creditors, but not to citizens? And why do foreign powers maintain military bases and economic dominance decades after independence? These frustrations didn't emerge overnight. They were the product of years of economic inequality, insecurity, and the failure of institutions to deliver justice or opportunity. The coups, then, did not erupt in isolation. They rose from the ashes of disappointment. It began in Mali, in August 2020. The government of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta was overthrown by a group of soldiers led by Colonel Assimi Goïta. Their justification: rampant corruption and the government's failure to control jihadist violence that had ravaged the country for nearly a decade. The world condemned the coup, but many Malians celebrated. For them, it wasn't the collapse of democracy, it was the end of hypocrisy. A year later, in Guinea, another military uprising dethroned President Alpha Condé after he altered the constitution to extend his rule. Crowds flooded the streets, cheering the soldiers who promised to restore dignity to the people. In Burkina Faso, frustration with civilian leadership and repeated terrorist attacks fueled 2 coups in 2022. The second brought Captain Ibrahim Traoré, just 34 years old, to power, one of Africa's youngest heads of state. Traoré's message was simple yet electrifying. We are not slaves of anyone. Burkina Faso will decide its own destiny. That declaration resonated far beyond the borders of his landlocked nation. Young Africans from Dakar to Dar es Salaam saw in him a symbol of resistance, a leader unafraid to defy foreign influence. Soon after, the pattern repeated. Niger fell in 2023. Gabon followed in 2023. Chad, already under military transition after the death of Idriss Déby, extended the interim rule of his son. And Sudan, torn by civil war and power struggles, remained under military control. A line had formed, a geographic and political corridor stretching across Africa's midsection. Analysts began calling it the Coup Belt. But what exactly is this Coup Belt? And why does it matter so much? Geographically, it cuts through some of Africa's most fragile states, nations grappling with poverty, insecurity, and the lingering impact of colonial borders. Politically, it reflects the collapse of trust in democratic institutions that never fully took root. Economically, it represents a rebellion against systems that left resource-rich countries poor and dependent. For decades, the Sahel region, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso hosted thousands of Western troops under the banner of counterterrorism. Billions of dollars were spent, yet insecurity worsened. Entire villages were abandoned, and extremist groups continued to expand. When the soldiers took power, their first target wasn't just domestic reform, it was foreign military presence. Within months, Mali and Burkina Faso ordered the withdrawal of French forces and shut down French media outlets accused of bias. Niger followed suit, expelling Western troops and terminating defense agreements. To Western governments, this was alarming, a rollback of decades of security cooperation. To many Africans, it was liberation. But the rise of military rule comes with contradictions. While junta leaders promise sovereignty and reform, their grip on power often leads to restrictions on press freedom, protest, and political opposition. Transitions back to civilian rule are repeatedly delayed, justified by claims of national stability. For the people, the results are mixed. Some celebrate the renewed sense of independence and the expulsion of foreign powers. Others fear a return to the cycles of authoritarianism that once defined post-colonial Africa. The African Union, which once took a hard stance against coups, finds itself struggling for relevance. Its suspensions of member states, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon, have done little to reverse the trend. Regional bodies like ECOWAS issued threats of intervention, but those warnings rang hollow in the face of rising popular support for the juntas. The deeper question, then, is whether these coups represent a rejection of democracy or a rejection of false democracy. Across social media, the conversation is shifting. Young Africans are not just watching, they're participating. Memes, speeches, and videos glorify military leaders as defenders of African dignity. Hashtags like #SovereigntyFirst, #NewAfrica, and #InFrenchControl trend across platforms. But beyond the noise lies a generational movement, one that seeks real accountability and African-led governance. It's not about worshiping the military. It's about dismantling a political class seen as compromised and detached. As one activist in Ouagadougou put it, "We tried democracy, but they sold our gold and gave us poverty. Maybe now we'll try discipline." It's a dangerous trade-off, freedom for order, but one born of desperation. Internationally, the consequences are profound. Africa's new military regimes are reshaping alliances. With Western influence waning, new partners have stepped in. Russia, through the Wagner network and its successors, has gained footholds in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. China continues to expand its economic influence, offering infrastructure without lectures on governance. Turkey and Iran are increasing military cooperation. For the first time since the Cold War, Africa has become a central stage for global power competition. But unlike before, many of these new relationships are being negotiated on African terms, or at least presented that way. Still, the risk remains, replacing one dependency with another. The economic toll of the coup wave is heavy. Sanctions from ECOWAS and Western partners have disrupted trade and banking systems. In Niger, border closures have led to shortages of fuel and food. In Mali and Burkina Faso, inflation has risen as foreign aid was cut. Yet, despite these hardships, public support for the juntas remains surprisingly strong. Why? Because for many citizens, economic pain is not new, but humiliation is. They are willing to endure short-term struggle for long-term dignity. It's a sentiment captured by a young Burkinabe student who said, "We'd rather be poor and free than rich and controlled." That mindset, defiant, patriotic, and fiercely independent, is reshaping how Africans see themselves in the world. But as the coup belt expands, one question dominates every debate. What comes next? History warns that military rulers rarely surrender power easily. Promises of reform can fade into repression. Economic mismanagement, corruption, and factional rivalries can undermine their legitimacy. Yet, this moment is different. It's not just about who rules. It's about how Africa wants to be ruled. Whether the continent will continue to mirror external political systems or craft its own model, one rooted in its realities, cultures, and aspirations. Perhaps the Coup Belt is not the end of democracy, but the beginning of a deeper conversation about governance. A reset, painful yet necessary. The West calls it instability. Africa calls it awakening. From Bamako to Niamey, from Ouagadougou to Libreville, a new message is echoing across the continent. Africa must stand on its own feet. It's a message filled with contradictions, pride and pain, courage and chaos. But it's a message that can no longer be ignored. Whether this revolution of khaki will lead to renewal or regression remains uncertain. What's clear is that Africa's youth are no longer content to wait for permission to define their destiny. Africa is in motion, not forward or backward, but inward, rediscovering its own power. The Coup Belt may divide opinions, but it has united one idea: that Africans deserve governments that serve them, not systems that exploit them. The world may label it instability, but to millions on the continent, it feels like a storm before dawn, the kind that clears the air before a new beginning. The Coup Belt is expanding, and with it, the struggle for Africa's future, a future not decided in Paris, Washington, or Moscow, but in the hearts and hands of Africans themselves. You've been watching Afri Global 24, your window into Africa and the world. If you found this video informative, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated on the latest stories shaping our continent and beyond. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a report, and join the conversation in the comments below. Until next time, this is Afri Global 24, bringing Africa closer to the globe 24 hours a day.